Pillar 1. Learning to drive. Changing your brain and body chemistry. Chapter 2. You can control your own brain chemistry. If you wanted to drive from the city to the beach and you didn't know how to drive, you probably wouldn't get very far. Learning to drive your vehicle first is, of course, essential to being able to get to your end destination. You wouldn't need to know all the details of how the vehicle works, although if you're interested in those mechanics, you might voluntarily learn that information, but you'd need to know the basics in order to understand how to operate the vehicle. In the same way, knowing the basics of biology that results in how you feel and how to drive your brain and body is essential in successfully making the changes you want to make in your life. Emotional warmth produces the hormone oxytocin in the brain and throughout the body. Of much recent interest is its significant role in the cardiovascular system. Dr. David R. Hamilton, Ph.D. We had a client, we'll call her Alice, in 2017, who had been working on herself for a few years. However, she found she was still triggered by certain experiences with other people. She found it impossible to avoid feeling hurt and angry when a loved one didn't reply to her messages. Despite all the work she had done to improve herself, she was still at the mercy of the actions or inactions of others. Over time, Alice developed the skill of controlling her own brain chemistry using the techniques we'll share with you. She found that she was being triggered less and less frequently, and when she was upset, she was able to get through it much quicker. This had a knock-on effect on her relationships. She was able to communicate with others more effectively and ask for what she wanted in a strategic and straightforward way, rather than being driven by negative emotions. The great news is that all the basics you need to know to control your own brain chemistry are no more complicated than the basics you need to drive a car. In a nutshell, connections between neurons, or thoughts, trigger chemicals that determine not only how we're feeling, but whether we have access to the cognitive thinking part of our brains or not. By developing the skill of controlling our brain chemistry, we control how we feel as well as our ability to problem solve and think strategically. Because the stress chemicals produced when we're in a negative emotional state cause blood to drain from the prefrontal cortex, where we do our cognitive thinking, we literally don't have access to the part of the brain that we need to think clearly. Trying to problem solve, process information, communicate effectively, be creative, think of alternative options, and assess risk while we are triggered emotionally is like trying to drive with a handbrake on. So, for example, when Alice sent a text and didn't receive a reply within a certain time frame, her brain automatically triggered stress chemicals based on her childhood experiences of being abandoned and ignored, which we'll go into in more detail in the next chapter. And those stress chemicals created sensations in her body, pressure in her chest, and an increased heart rate and a slight tightening in her throat. The moment she became aware of those feelings, Alice's conscious mind automatically interpreted those sensations as hurt. Since the conscious mind's job is to make sense of experiences, it automatically and instantly focused on the apparent reasons for the hurt that were in front of her in that moment. When those neurons connected, they triggered yet more stress chemicals. And when she thought about the fact that the person didn't respond to her and therefore didn't care, those thoughts led to no one cares. In other words, more evidence she's unworthy and unloved. And so those feelings were perpetuated. As that cycle of stress chemicals, feelings of being ignored and being hurt, and the specific connections between neurons, thoughts about all the apparent reasons why no one cares about her and what that means, continued to build, blood drained from the cognitive thinking part of Alice's brain, and she was unable to think rationally. Caught in the loop of emotional pain and all the thoughts that maintained the momentum of that pain, Alice was unable to see anything outside of it. She was unable to reason that the person may not have received the text or maybe very busy, and their lack of response didn't have anything to do with her. She was unable to come up with the words that would let the person know what she needed. That part of her brain was offline. She became stuck in the mud, and the more she tried to think about it, the faster those wheels spun. While this process in the brain is on automatic by default, there's a simple little exercise that we taught Alice and will also share with you that will empower you to gain control over your brain chemistry as well as condition your brain and body to produce lower levels of stress chemicals and higher levels of feel-good chemicals over time, just like getting physically fit.
Under the hood. What you first need to know. Thoughts are connections between neurons in the neocortex of the brain. Those connections trigger matching chemicals, and those chemicals create feelings. To put it simply, negative thoughts trigger stress chemicals, positive thoughts trigger feel-good chemicals. Since all negative emotions fall at a level somewhere in the fight, flight, freeze emergency state, whenever you're feeling a negative emotion, your brain and body will be producing stress chemicals. That means that your brain and body are going into the same state they would if you were faced with immediate physical danger. Some of the effects of those stress chemicals on the system are blood is pumped away from the organs to the extremities, or running away or fighting, and blood drains from the prefrontal cortex, where we do our cognitive thinking, to the back of the brain, the unconscious part, because when we're faced with a bear, there's no time to negotiate, strategize, or problem solve. We need to take immediate instinctive action if we want to survive. The result is that negative emotions are about more than just feeling bad. They mean we literally can't think straight. This is why, after we calm down from being triggered, we think of all the things we should have said in the moment. The stress chemicals that were causing Alice's feelings of being ignored and hurt were part of the same survival system that would have been triggered if she'd been in immediate physical danger. All of this is perfectly normal and healthy, short term. The problem comes when we're living in these stressed states for prolonged periods of time. In addition to the chemical response to the connections between neurons as we think consciously, there is also a chemical response to input from sensory receptors. In other words, as we experience the world around us, as we see, hear, smell, taste, and feel, the brain automatically refers to the information it holds from our previous experiences of that sensation and then automatically prompts a chemical response. For example, an expression on someone's face matches a parent's expression and automatically triggers a cocktail of stress chemicals. Those chemicals create sensations and emotions, fear, anger, anxiety, confusion, without our conscious engagement or awareness. We then consciously give meaning to those sensations and emotions. I'm not good enough, they don't like me. And as those neurons connect, they produce yet more of the same stress chemicals. You can see how this process is perpetuated and continues to confirm those negative beliefs, self-image, and experience of the world around us. How to drive, controlling your own brain chemistry. It is possible to change your own chemistry from stress chemicals to feel-good chemicals, as long as you keep your focus off the negative and on the positive for between 60 and 90 seconds. As neuroscientist Jill Boulter-Taylor explains in her concept of the 90-second rule, it takes under 90 seconds from the point of a trigger for the peak and dissipation of stress chemicals. During those 60 to 90 seconds, the stress chemicals dissipate, flushing through your system and allowing your brain and body to return to a calm state. Unless, that is, they are re-triggered. So, for example, as you think about something you're worried about, those connections between neurons, or thoughts, trigger the release of stress chemicals into your system. You'll feel the effects of those chemicals in the form of worry or anxiety. If you were to stop there and create different neural connections by thinking thoughts that aren't worrying, you would no longer feel the effects of those stress chemicals, and the worry or anxiety would be gone. Of course, What happens for most of us, automatically and naturally, is this. We have feelings of worry, we automatically think about them, and we automatically think of all the reasons for those fears. And each neural connection, or thought, triggers a new burst of stress chemicals, restarting that 90-second clock each time. While you're focusing on what triggers you, you're pumping stress chemicals into your system in real time. Just like leaving the hot water tap running will fill the bath with hot water. As long as you switch that hot water tap off and keep the cold water tap running instead, you're changing the temperature of the water. Of course, if you switch the cold water tap off and switch the hot water tap back on, you'll end up with a very hot bath again. In the same way, those taps are connections between neurons in the neocortex of your brain. The hot water tap represents connections between neurons as you think about things that trigger you, things you're worried about, things that hurt you and things that make you angry, anything that doesn't feel good. The cold water tap represents connections between neurons as you think about things that feel good, things you love, things you're grateful for, things you're looking forward to, anything that feels good. Keep that stress chemical tap off and that feel-good chemical tap running for a minute and a half, and you'll have changed your brain and body chemistry from stress chemicals to feel-good chemicals. It's not what it looks like. Imagine someone who has never experienced electricity before. They walk into a room with an overhead light in the center of the ceiling. At first, the light is off. Then the light bulb lights up. Then it goes off again. Since they've never encountered electricity before, they don't know that the way to make that light bulb light up is to flick the switch on the wall. They'd focus on the light bulb itself. They'd try to figure out how to make that light come on by fully focusing on the light bulb. Of course, there's no visible connection between the light bulb and the switch on the wall behind them. But you know that in order to make the light bulb light up, you need to take your focus off the light bulb, perhaps even turn your back on it if the switch is behind you, and flick the switch on the wall. Flicking that switch results in the light bulb being illuminated in the center of the room. The light bulb represents how you're feeling. The switch represents the connections between neurons or thoughts that trigger the chemical reaction that results in the way you're feeling. In order to change the way you feel, you need to take your focus off the feelings, the light bulb, and choose what your focus will be, flicking the switch. Take a moment right now to test this for yourself. Don't do this exercise, of course, if you're driving or doing anything else that needs your full attention. You can still listen, but come back to this exercise once you're able to fully focus. Take a deep breath, close your eyes, and think of your favorite color. If you don't have a favorite, just pick one you like. Imagine being surrounded by that beautiful color. Allow yourself to experience the feeling of that color and notice what you love about it. Fully focus on it. Notice how you feel. What you're feeling is the effect of feel-good chemicals. Now think about something or someone you're worried about, just very briefly, and notice the difference in how you feel. What you're feeling now is the effect of stress chemicals. Now go back to thinking about your favorite color. Again, imagine being surrounded by that beautiful color. Allow yourself to fully focus on what you love about it. Notice how you feel. The switch on the wall is your focus. The current setting of that switch determines the state of the light bulb in the center of the room. Your focus, the neural connections you're making at that particular moment, determines what chemicals your brain and body are producing, which determines how you're feeling. It's simple, but not easy. Change your focus from negative to positive and you change your brain chemistry from stress chemicals to feel-good chemicals, which in turn changes how you feel and how you think. The reason it's not easy is because stress chemicals are stronger than feel-good chemicals. After all, stress chemicals create our survival response. It's more important to focus on the wild animal that's threatening to attack us than on the pretty flowers. Stress chemicals are designed to get and keep our attention on the danger until that danger has gone. It's all about survival. The problem is that the part of the brain that triggers that emergency response can't tell the difference between immediate physical threat and the danger of someone judging us, or the memory of a mean comment, or any other negative emotional experience. This is why it's easier to feel bad than to feel good. It's a skill. Gaining control over your brain chemistry is a skill, just like learning a musical instrument or any other physical skill. With practice, it becomes easier. At first, when Alice waited for a response to her text and didn't get one, the feelings of being ignored and hurt were instant and intense. That was the effect of the stress chemicals in her system. Her brain and body had already gone into that emergency state before she became consciously aware of it. It was impossible for her to switch her focus to something positive, even just her favorite color, from the middle of that triggered state with her body full of stress chemicals. However, as she practiced the beginner's exercise, which we'll come to shortly, when she wasn't triggered, she was able to start developing the skill of conditioning her brain and body to produce lower levels of stress chemicals and higher levels of feel-good chemicals, so that she was better prepared for those triggering situations. She did this in the same way she would have run short distances, increasing them gradually if training for a marathon. Getting off the couch and running even a mile without conditioning the body to adjust to that level of physical activity is unrealistic. On the other hand, by running up and down the street and then around the block and gradually building the stamina and muscles that would support running longer distances, the body is able to build up to that demand. Think of practicing the beginner's exercise every day when you're not triggered, just as you would running training or developing the skill of playing a musical instrument. Rather than waiting until the day of a marathon to start running or the night of a concert to start playing a musical instrument, you would prepare by practicing in the time leading up to the marathon or the concert. In the same way, it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to use this exercise in the middle of being emotionally triggered without having built up the skill beforehand through practice. Apart from being able to change how you're feeling in the moment, conditioning your brain and body to feel good more of the time, and being able to access your cognitive thinking on demand, this skill will also help you to change those negative childhood memories, coming up in Chapter 3, that are currently providing the references that prove the limiting beliefs that are holding you back. Since it's the negative emotions, or the survival response, that makes it difficult, if not impossible, to change negative memories, bringing down those stress chemicals and replacing them with feel-good chemicals is the first step in changing adverse implicit childhood memories to the opposite, positive, and empowering, while keeping the explicit memory of what originally happened.
Take your brain for a test drive. Think of someone or something you love, such as a person or an animal. Nothing with any negative connections. In other words, no associations with worry, loss, guilt, or regret. Just love. Alice started out by using her younger brother for this exercise, but she couldn't get any results. We discovered it was because her brother had passed away a few years earlier, and she naturally felt pain and loss combined with the love. When she switched to using her beloved cat instead, she was able to achieve the change in her brain chemistry. If you can't think of a person or an animal, you could choose a place or an activity you love, or even an object, like a favorite pair of shoes or a car. Something that when you think of it creates a feeling of love or expansion. For example, babies, pets, a favorite animal, gardening, trees, sunsets, and hobbies. When Odille took a group of businessmen through this exercise a few years ago, one of them used Hawaii as his subject. That was the first time we'd had someone use a place instead of a person or an animal, but it worked perfectly for him, and it's worked for many others since. Another client used a stick insect she'd rescued. Choose whatever helps you to feel love when you think about it. The beginner's exercise. Once you have a subject, go through this little exercise. 1. Take a deep breath, close your eyes, and think of your favorite color again. Imagine being surrounded by that beautiful color and allow yourself to fully focus on how lovely it is. 2. Now think of that subject you love. Imagine holding that person, animal, place, or activity in your arms in a hug. As you imagine this and really focus on it, your brain will start to produce the feel-good chemicals endorphins, serotonin, and oxytocin. 3. Notice the feeling of love in your chest or solar plexus and imagine it as a ball of light or energy. 4. Imagine that lighter energy spreading down to your toes, up to the top of your head, and out to your fingertips, so that you're now full of that light or energy. This increases the level of those feel-good chemicals still further. Then imagine that lighter energy overflowing from you and filling the room you're in. Congratulations, you've just changed your brain and body chemistry.
Don't worry if the feeling wasn't very strong, or even if you didn't feel it at all. It can take time and practice to experience the effects, depending on the levels of stress chemicals already in your system. When I first started practicing this technique, I experienced the good feelings for no more than a few seconds, and even then it felt uneasy. I'd been living in an intense state of stress for so long that my body was very uncomfortable with the good feelings. It was almost painful. I treated the exercise like physical stretching, practicing gently for just a few seconds at a time and stopping when it became too uncomfortable, then coming back to it later for a little more. Gradually, I was able to build up to feeling the good feelings for longer and longer periods of time, until it became my default chemical or emotional state. Of course, I still get triggered occasionally, that's part of being human, but I've gone from being constantly stressed to feeling calm, peaceful, and happy most of the time. I've never been back to that state of despair, anger, pain, and hopelessness I experienced up to the end of 2015. And I've certainly never gone back to the emotional and mental place I was in as I sat in my car in front of that brick wall in 2008. In fact, Steve finds it difficult to imagine me as a stressed person at all, since we only met in February 2017, after I'd already changed my brain and body chemistry and childhood memories.
Emotional state conditioning. Think of it like physical fitness. If you haven't worked out before, it may take a little while before you're able to run up and down the street without getting out of breath. But if you ran a little every day, your body would automatically build stamina and become conditioned for fitness. Eventually, you would be able to run further. You might even sign up for a marathon. It's all about the incremental physiological changes your body automatically makes as it adapts to the new activity, building muscles and stamina. Emotional state conditioning is the same. Practicing the little beginner's exercise every day, several times a day, as you can see it only takes a few seconds, will build your emotional stamina and allow your brain and body to become conditioned to producing those feel-good chemicals more frequently. And it will get easier and more noticeable the more you do it. As Alice practiced the exercise consistently, she started to notice it was becoming easier and easier to recover from being triggered by the lack of response from others. It wasn't a smooth, straight line. Just like getting physically fit, there were times when it was more difficult, when she felt like she'd gone back to those old patterns. But as she continued to practice, she developed the skill to the point where she was triggered less frequently, and, importantly, when she was triggered, she was able to pull herself out of negative emotions more quickly. Recap. Negative thoughts trigger stress chemicals that take the cognitive thinking part of the brain offline. Positive thoughts trigger feel-good chemicals that allow blood to return to the cognitive thinking part of the brain. Stress chemicals are stronger than feel-good chemicals. We need them for survival, which is why it's easier to feel bad than to feel good. Although Alice was eventually able to change her emotional state more easily and felt good more of the time, she kept finding herself in situations where people seemed to ignore or disregard her. She continued to be attracted to men who were emotionally unavailable, and she still found herself unable to rely on her close friends to be there for her when she needed them. Her negative implicit childhood memories of being rejected and ignored were still proving her self-image and worldview. I'm unworthy and unlovable, and determining her perception, choices, and decisions, ultimately leading to the same recurring patterns. As we'll explain in the next chapter, once we helped her to change the negative memories, those patterns also changed automatically. So now you know how to drive. Let's talk about how you ended up where you are and how to use this little brain chemistry exercise to get to where you want to be.